This is a massive week for FPL. I am making 3 transfers this week and I'm also playing my triple captain. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so let's start with the defense and keeper situation. I feel like my defense on paper probably looks better than it actually is. Sells and Murillo against Sunderland at home to start with. Listen, Nottingham Forest defensively, obviously we have a lot of question marks, but I feel like the performance midweek against Royal Bears was a big positive. Royal Bears only created an extra 0.49. So defensively, Nottingham Forest obviously done very, very well in that game, considering the opponent they were up against. Also, I want to add, Murillo didn't play that game. Hopefully, we get more updates from Ange. But even then, if he's not fully fit for this game, I would just play Richards. And listen, Richards has a good chance of DEFCON against Liverpool. But I'm not really going to transfer out my Nottingham Forest assets before my wildcard now. They're here to stay. But listen, Sunderland will be a tough side, but we'll see what happens. Cucurella against Brighton at home. I think this is a very difficult game for Chelsea. Chelsea obviously have a couple players out, for example, Tosin. And we know how much Enzo Maresca has spoken about Tosin's impact into that central centre-back area from build-up. So I'm not too sure what Chelsea will do exactly. Obviously, still have Chalobah fit. I think Reece James will probably play this game at right-back, which should allow Cucurella the license to push forward at left-back. But again, I'm not too hopeful of a clean sheet or Chelsea's clean sheets prospects going into the game. I think it'll be a very tough game. And then Pedro Porro against Wolves. Probably say this is probably the best chance of a clean sheet out of the 4. Obviously, Strand Larsen's now back for Wolves, which changes things up a bit for Wolves, obviously. A better attacking dynamics are created when he plays. The only thing I would say on Pedro Porro, slightly concerned about his minutes. I still think he'll start. I think he'll probably get around 75 minutes. Obviously, Udogie started this game. Udogie, Spence, Porro, they're all getting themselves minutes, if that makes sense. Obviously, Porro is still the main one starting, but we know Jed Spence can play right back. Udogie can play left back. But I'm pretty confident that Porro will start this game. Well, I'm hoping anyway. But let's get into the midfield. Okay, so let's get into it with the midfield. And let's start with my guy, Elliot Anderson. Sunderland at home, obviously a great fixture in terms of potential attacking returns. But what was interesting was that against Real Betis in the Europa League, Elliot Anderson was actually the most advanced midfielder with Douglas Luiz and Sangare playing. So maybe that's something that Ange might want to trial going forward. But again, even in that game, Anderson still would have hit DEFCON. So he's a bit of a DEFCON cheat code. I keep saying it. The consistent 4 points are there. So that's why Anderson is in my team. Phil Foden, I'll touch on last because obviously that's the transfer I made. Cody Gakpo against Crystal Palace. Again, this is a play that I'm looking to transfer out. I've already used 2 free transfers. I had 4 going into this week, but I'll talk on him a bit later again. Element in the eye, West Ham at home on a Monday. Brilliant fixture. As we know, there's a lot going on at West Ham. Everton going forward are very, very solid. And I feel like Goodison Park, Monday Night Football, under the lights, I feel like this could be a very, very good game. I feel like Everton could score 3 or 4 goals against this poor West Ham side. Obviously, so early into the season, when your defense or keepers are changing, that's when you know it's bad. Obviously, last game Areola played, Hermanson got dropped, so that's when you know things are obviously going massively wrong at West Ham. So I'm very, very hopeful of Ndiaye's prospects going into this week. Now, the man next to him, Bruno Fernandes. I saw a stat the other day that if Bruno Fernandes had scored his penalty against Fulham, he would have been the second highest scoring midfielder. And I feel like if that was the case, that would have, let's say, certainly changed the perspective on Bruno Fernandes. Because in my eyes, Bruno Fernandes is one of the best midfielders in FPL. Again, 90-minute man on penalties, can obviously ship in an open play with goals and assists and DEFCON potential. Again, Brentford away. Listen, Brentford haven't, let's say, been the best at home. They're obviously slightly better. It could, you never know, to be honest, with Manchester United in terms of what they're going to do. But I feel like I still trust Bruno Fernandes enough. And let's just get into the attack. Okay, so let's get on to the attack. And I've gone with Erling Haaland. Finally brought him in. I've took out Mo Salah. I took out Ollie Watkins. And I brought in Haaland and Foden. Let me start on Foden first. Phil Foden right now is in brilliant form. We know Phil Foden at the top of his game. It is a brilliant player. And I feel like from an FPL point of view, listen, his explosiveness as a midfielder can't really be matched by many other players. We know Phil Foden can easily go and get 2 and 3 returns. For example, next week, Manchester City have Brentford. He's already scored a hat-trick against Brentford in the past. We know Phil Foden has that ability. And looking at, for example, this Burnley game, we know Burnley are going to sit deep. We know Phil Foden, first of all, has a great strike from outside the box. We saw it again against Huddersfield. So when you're breaking down the low blocks, you're so good technically that Phil Foden is, and you have that ability to score from outside the box. It is a match made in heaven for Phil Foden to get FPL points. I think the only concern will probably be Phil Foden's minutes after he played 70 odd against Huddersfield. The only thing I would say with that is I feel like Pep Guardiola done that just because he knows Phil Foden is finally finding that rhythm, and he just wanted to continue that sharpness that Phil Foden's playing at, the level Phil Foden's playing at right now. And listen, we've seen it in the past. There was a period where Phil Foden played like 19 games in a row in the league and in the cup games for Pep Guardiola. Like, it can happen, and I feel like this will be the case where Phil Foden against Burnley, he will start, he will get good minutes, and again against Brentford, if he's fully fit, he will start again. So that's why I've gone to Phil Foden. I feel like the upside is so high, which is why I wanted to bring him in. Haaland will be my triple captain this week. Listen, Burnley are bottom right now for expected goals conceded. They're a poor side. I don't think stylistically this is the best matchup for Haaland. We know, well, let's say when Haaland has a bit more space to attack, for example, against Arsenal, he's so good at that. But again, Haaland obviously has other aspects of his game that are very strong in terms of breaking down the lower blocks. We know he only needs half a yard to get a shot off. We know aerially he's very good as well. So that's why I've gone with Erling Haaland. I don't think there's any point overcomplicating the triple captain's chip. Of course, I'd rather play on a midfielder. I think that makes more sense. But at the same time, listen, when Haaland's in this form, when Haaland is fully fit, when Manchester City are slowly starting to click, I'd rather just play the triple captain now. I'm not overcomplicating it. The next man is João Pedro against Brighton, his former club. Cole Palmer's now out until after the international break. So there is that potential that João Pedro could be on penalties. Of course, it could also be Enzo. That probably does mean João Pedro probably will get good minutes going into this game against Brighton. So that's obviously a positive, even though they do have a Champions League fixture midweek. So maybe he could get an early sub in terms of maybe around the 80th minute mark. Obviously, they've still got guys like Garnacho, Gittins that can obviously, let's say, play in those attacking positions. But again, I'm not really concerned. Again, I don't think this is going to be, let's say, a high-scoring game from an FPL point of view for João Pedro. Brighton, defensively, if you're looking at expected goals conceded, they're a fine side kind of thing. They're not a side that you want to target, let's say. So that's why, listen, I can't really transfer him out kind of thing. João Pedro's going to be my team, and we'll see what happens with that. But more importantly, let's look at my reasoning with why I want to take out Cody Gakpo. Okay, so now let me explain my decision making on why I want to transfer out Cody Gakpo. First of all, I'm wildcarding in game week 8, which is why I'm only looking at the game week 6 and game week 7 window. Cody Gakpo against Crystal Palace, I'll be honest, even though his minutes should be all right, I just don't rate Liverpool's prospects, and I don't rate Cody Gakpo's prospects from a, let's say, attacking point of view. I feel like Crystal Palace are a very difficult team to break down. Then the question now becomes, who is the best Cody Gakpo replacement for me? And I feel like, having already brought in Phil Foden, the most obvious answer that a lot of you lot will be screaming at is obviously going to be Anton Semenyo. So the midfielders that are the best buy right now in FPL, according to the data over the next 2 weeks, are Bruno Fernandes, Saka, Mo Salah in third, Phil Foden, by the way, in fourth, even though his expected minutes are 66. So if you think Foden's going to play more than that over the next 2, it is a brilliant buy. Semenyo in at 5th, Reinders in at 6th, Ndiaye in at 7th, and then Buemo at 8th. Then the question mark now becomes, Semenyo, why am I not buying him? The reason why I don't want to buy Semenyo is, first of all, Leeds are obviously not an easy pushover in terms of defensively. They're a mid-table side when it comes to expected goals conceded. Secondly, that game week 7 fixture for Bournemouth, it is Fulham. Fulham are a very difficult side to break down, and I feel like Marcus Silva does an incredible job with, let's say, Fulham's defensive unit. So it is not, let's say, the most ideal 2 fixtures on paper, even though you could argue that Leeds fixture is a good fixture to attack. Then the question mark becomes, if I'm not going to go with Semenyo and I've already gone with Foden, who else am I looking to bring in? Obviously, I can afford Bukayo Saka. But Bukayo Saka is currently predicted to get 10.9 points over the next 2 weeks. But that also regards his expected minutes being at 87. I'm not too sure if I feel his expected minutes match with the data, if that makes sense. I'm not too sure if he gets 87 minutes on average over the next 2 weeks. But there is one midfielder that stands out for me, and that is Mbeumo. And Mbeumo expected minutes are at 82. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think expected minutes are pretty much going to be 90 over the next 2. I think the only reason he got the early sub against Chelsea was obviously a game state dependent substitution from Amorim. So, with Manchester United having Brentford away and Sunderland at home, those are two good fixtures. If, let's say, here I put Brian Mbeumo's expected minutes at 90, which is what I think they will be, he now becomes the fourth best midfielder to buy over the likes of Semenyo. He's predicted to get 4.5 points in game week 6 and 5.5 points in game week 7. Now, a lot of people will then argue is, Bain, Semenyo hasn't even come off yet. He's played 90 minutes every single game. So you know what? Fair enough. Let's put 90 minutes for Semenyo into the game model. Semenyo will then be predicted to get 9.7 points over the next 2 weeks. So Brian Mbeumo is still predicted over the next 2 weeks, if minutes are the same, to get more points than Semenyo, which I think is a realistic, let's say, conversation to have. Of course, it's not by a lot, but I'm willing to bet against Semenyo for, let's say, the upside of that Mbeumo brings. Of course, another positive with Mbeumo is set pieces, multiple routes to points for Manchester United. He obviously takes on. Again, that former club narrative, I know some people love it. I hear it, but listen, it can go either way. But I feel like United's prospects from an attacking point of view are not too bad over the next two. And I'm willing to bet against Semenyo with a calculated risk in Brian Mbeumo, which would mean a double up with Brian Mbeumo and Bruno Fernandes. Are there any other midfielders that stand out for me? I think the answer is probably no over the next two. I think the next two fixtures are there to target for Manchester United, which is why I will probably be bringing in Brian Mbeumo for Cody Gakpo. But I'm not going to lock in that transfer just yet. But I'm hoping you lot enjoyed my thinking on why, let's say, I've gone with that option. There was also another option that I was thinking, by the way, which was Krupi Jr. up to Richarlison. So the best forwards to bring in over the next 2 weeks, according to data, is Erling Haaland, Ollie Watkins, Gyökeres, João Pedro, Ivan Nilsson, Calvert-Lewin, Woltemade, Sesko. So the models don't really, let's say, rate Richarlison. Richarlison comes in below Chris Wood, but that is mostly because he's expecting minutes are around 71, which is why, listen, I think that's a fair, let's say, assessment over Richarlison's potential minutes over the next two. And Mbeumo, in my eyes, is a bit more of a certainty in terms of minutes, and I feel like his upside could be very, very high. Also, Mbeumo does quite well with, like, let's say, the baseline bonus point system, which is why I'm leaning towards Mbeumo. That's going to be my decision for this week. I'm 99% sure I'm bringing in Mbeumo. Let's leave it at that. But before I end the video, make sure you guys like the video. Make sure you comment my thoughts on my team and subscribe to the channel. And I'll be back soon.